a big day. It starts early. So let's get into those early games. And for Europe, hey guys, some games on this morning you can watch. There's two games on it. I believe this is 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock in my time. So 1 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Eastern. And then this one starts at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock my time. I guess the Canucks just want to get the games done and over with. Apparently there's a meet and greet in Vancouver tomorrow for Canuck fans at 10 a.m. Thanks to my friend Brody for telling me that. I guess if I wanted to go in and meet them, I guess I could get up early tomorrow morning and do it. But I don't see that happening. Florida. 39-29-8 overall. They're 5-4-1 in their last 10. They've lost their last 2. They're in against the Bruins, who are 48-17-11. 5-2-3 in their last 10, and they won their last game. So Florida is up against it. They have a game in hand, which they're using. And New Jersey does play, so they'll still have a game in hand. But if they lose this one and Jersey wins, it's over. Games in hand won't matter. They have to win this game tomorrow morning in Boston. And it's a game I'm torn on because I want to see Boston finish first. I do. But it would be a great story if Florida made the playoffs. Boston's 1 point behind Tampa based on the Tampa Bay win tonight. And they're 6 points ahead of Toronto. So I'm not concerned about Toronto catching them. My only concern is over these last few games maybe picking up some bad habits. Or, their season is basically done. They have 6 games left. They could move up. Sure, they could finish first. They absolutely have that opportunity. They have 2 games in hand on Tampa, and they're 1 point back. But they're in kind of a comfortable spot here. And Florida's coming in as the hungrier of the two teams. They should be. I would expect Luongo. I would expect Rask. Luongo does not have a great track record in Boston. That's kind of why I'm expecting Luongo to go in here. And for Boston, they lost the game 3-0 that they played against Florida this year. They get them 3 more times. And how they play against Florida will probably go a long way to deciding whether or not Florida makes the playoffs and whether or not Boston finishes first. So it should be a very hard-fought game tomorrow. It should be. Next up, Ottawa, 27-39-11. They're in against Detroit, who are 29-38-11. Ottawa's 4-6 in their last 10. They won their last game. Detroit's 3-7 in their last 10. They've won their last 2. Condon's been confirmed for Ottawa. Howard's likely for Detroit. It's an interesting thing that happens when a team gets eliminated from the playoffs. When they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. They play a little looser. They take a few more chances. And they start winning. It happens a lot. And it's happening this year too. We have a lot of teams that are out of the running. That actually have put up some decent totals lately. Now, if you look at their last 10, you have 4-6 and 3-7. You're not looking at teams that are playing fantastically well. But over the last week, Detroit started picking it up a little bit. Ottawa's shown flickers. They've shown flickers at times over the last month and a half. They've shown enough to sort of tantalize Ottawa fans that things are going to be better next year. But they've been bad enough in games that they've lost where you go, well, maybe that turnaround isn't coming yet. So it really depends on whether you see the glass as half full or half empty as an Ottawa fan. For Detroit fans, you guys have been looking at this team as building towards something probably starting next year. And it all comes down to that all-important draft lottery. And I'm really anxious to see who's going to win that lottery. If Detroit wins that lottery, it's a huge move for them. If Ottawa wins it, it's huge for them. We could look at this as a game that helps to determine lottery positions, but really, in all honesty, these teams are both playing for next year. They have a lot of guys who are playing for their jobs next year. And I would think there'd be more pressure in probably Detroit, because if Holland doesn't come back, if they don't decide to extend Ken Holland, a new GM comes in, it's quite often the coach will find himself on the outs with the new GM because they want to bring in their own guy. So There may be some more desperation to Detroit's game. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, but could be. Speaking of desperation, Columbus is at 44-29-5 overall. They've won their last 2. They're 9-1 in their last 10. They're in against the Vancouver Canucks, who are 29-40-9. They're 4-6-0 in their last 10 and won their last 3. Much like Ottawa, much like Detroit, much like some of the other teams that are far out of the playoffs, Vancouver has started playing better with no pressure. No pressure on them. It'll probably be Markstrom. It'll probably be, I would think Korpisalo would start tomorrow because it's Vancouver. But Carolina's 1 point behind Pittsburgh and 1 point ahead of Philly. They really need the wins, so do they just stick with Bobrovsky all the way through this? Vancouver is as poor a team talent-wise as any team in the league, with Besser out, Vanek traded, and just some of the other guys who are on their way down. But there's a determination there. Coach Travis Green is trying to instill some really solid work ethic, ethics, I guess, plural, into some of these guys who either were seen as middling on other squads, or maybe are learning the ropes. And at least tomorrow I get a chance to see Adam Gaudette. I didn't have a chance to see him last night, so I get a chance to see him tomorrow. Excuse me. At least I assume he'll be in the lineup. No, am I lucky he won't. All these guys get signed and play their first games while I'm off last night, and odds are tomorrow I'm not going to get to see him. They're going to be like, nah, forget it. They're going to do that. Either way, Columbus needs the win. Vancouver really doesn't, which means Vancouver probably gets it. They've won 4 out of 5, and they've looked pretty good. There's a lot of hard work being done by Vancouver Canucks right now. And those players are making it more frustrating for Canuck fans who are like, guys, we had the lottery all figured out, and you guys are kind of wrecking it. So we'll see if they continue to wreck it tomorrow night. I wouldn't bet against it. And that's tomorrow afternoon. Montreal, 28-37-12 overall. They're 3-6-1 in their last 10. They won their last game. They're in against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's 44-28-6 overall. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10. They won their last game. Niemi's starting for Montreal. That's interesting because, of course, at the start of the year, Niemi had a really rough start for Pittsburgh. There were a lot of Penguins fans that piled on him. Then he goes to Florida. Then he ends up with Montreal. And the idea being he's going to Montreal to retire. He's not going to be back next year. Which European team's going to pick him up? He's been pretty darn good. And tomorrow he has a chance to make sure that Pittsburgh doesn't finish first in their division. They're 5 points behind Washington, are those Penguins. They're 1 point ahead of Columbus and 2 points ahead of Philly. There is a very fine line between being first and fourth in that division. And Pittsburgh could easily find themselves in fourth place. And it's funny because, Columbus has had this incredible run. Incredible run, really, seriously. And yet Pittsburgh is still 2 points ahead of, or 1 point ahead of them, and Philly is still sitting 1 point behind Columbus. So you're still not in a really comfortable position here, Columbus. Pretty comfortable in your lead over Florida, so your chances of making the playoffs are better. And for Pittsburgh, their odds of making the playoffs are pretty darn good. But what spot are they in going into the playoffs? Who do they get in the first round? Do they end up playing against an Atlantic Division team? What if they end up with the number 2 wild card? And they end up playing a Boston Bruins or a Tampa Bay Lightning. What then? It could be a very interesting run for Pittsburgh. Would that be better for Pittsburgh? Does Pittsburgh run over Boston and run over Tampa and then meet one of their own divisional foes in the championship round? What if it's Washington? Yeah, we can go on with this forever. Montreal gets a chance to play spoiler again. Again, you're looking at a team that's 3-6-1 in their last 10. You look at Montreal and say there's not much to pick, not much to look at, and yet they won their last game. Once you're mathematically gonzo, you can relax. And Montreal's been playing relatively well over the last week and a half. But again, it's in... You look at it in comparison with how they were before that, and you got to kind of shrug your shoulders just a little bit. I look at my power rankings. Whoever's going to end up being 31st tomorrow night, there's going to be some fans that rail against it. But it's mainly that a lot of these teams that are at the bottom, some of them have been playing relatively well over the last little while. Some of them not so much. And it's a matter of trying to figure out which teams actually really been playing bad and which ones haven't. And it's a little bit tougher than it may look on the surface. And I'm honestly not looking forward to it tomorrow night. On some level, just because it's tough coming up with 31 right now. Next up, Islanders. The Islanders are 32, 36, and 10. We were just talking about teams that have been playing badly. They're 3-7 in their last 10. They lost their last game. The New Jersey Devils, 40, 28, and 9 overall. They're 6-3-1 in their last 10. They lost their last game. New Jersey's in a very interesting position. They're a number 2 wild card. They're 3 points behind Philly and 3 points ahead of Florida. So just on the surface, you can look at that and say, okay, they're going to be the number 2 wild card. Sure. Unless they go on a run. Maybe it starts with this game tomorrow night against the Islanders. And it's funny because, they lost that game against Pittsburgh in overtime. Counts as a loss. But we'll see whether or not they draw from that. Whether or not they use that as sort of a wake up that they need to play better down the stretch here and solidify that spot. Because again, if New Jersey loses and Florida wins, then we're talking about New Jersey being 1 point up on Florida, and Florida having that game in hand. So it takes the power out of New Jersey's hands if they don't come up big against the Islanders at home tomorrow night. The Islanders, honestly, they've got to win something to close out this season, because they've got this guy John Tavares that has to, on some level, be paying attention and saying, wait, do I want to be here another 7 years? I've given how many years of my career to this team, and they're no closer to winning now than when I got here? Maybe I want to move on to a team where I have a better chance. Maybe I want to move down the street and play for the Rangers. I'm just throwing that out there, and I throw it out there every now and then because I look at teams that could really use a center, and maybe they can come up with the cap space. The Rangers, Carolina kind of works too. There's a lot of teams where it kind of works, and I get the feeling that if he moves on from the Islanders, he'll probably want to stay on the East Coast. Just a feeling I get. We'll see. But if he and the Islanders can have a little mini run to close out the season and end up at 500 and things look a little rosy for next year, maybe it's something that'll help keep him there. Odds are he's already got his mind made up one way or the other, and we're not going to know until after the regular season's finished where he's leaning. We'll find out, though. The Rangers, 33, 36, and 9 overall. They're 3-4-3 in their last 10. They've lost their last 3 games. They're in against Carolina, who are 35, 32, and 11. They're 5-5 in their last 10. They won their last game. This is going to be a very loose hockey game. This is going to be a very probably back and forth hockey game between two teams of players who are disappointed with how this season's worked out. And there's a lot of uncertainty on both rosters, pretty much from top to bottom. Who's coming back next year? In Carolina's case, I would not be saying that if not for the firing of Ron Francis. The firing of Ron Francis and how it took place and how the new owner put his stamp on the team by removing the stamp of the previous team, it leaves everything kind of in flux. And I really can't honestly say I have any clue who's untouchable right now for Carolina, because they need to name a GM first, and we need to know just how far Dundon's willing to go to build an immediate contender. Because, yeah, you can mortgage the future, bring in some veterans, and probably get a lot better in the short term and pay for it later. And I don't know if that's where we're at with Carolina. Maybe Dundon looks at this team and says, look, we got all these young kids. Well, let's get some veteran guys in here. And he'll look for somebody who is a GM but kind of reports to him. With the Rangers, you don't have that. You have a good young team who are going through some growing pains, and there's going to be a sell-off at the end of the season. But there are certain guys that you get the feeling that the GM won't move out of New York. And I don't get that with Carolina. So there's a lot of uncertainty with both teams, and they're both just playing out the string. I'm not going to put down how far out Carolina is, because we know they're virtually eliminated. They're not mathematically, but they're virtually eliminated. So I'm not going to bet that every team ahead of them gets no points and they get all of the points, because that would just be a little bit ridiculous. And I do my best not to be ridiculous. Winnipeg, 47-20-10 overall, 6-3-1 in their last 10. They lost their last game. They're in against the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are 47-24-7. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They've won their last 2. Winnipeg is second in their division. They're 7 points behind Nashville. Toronto is third in their division, 6 points behind Boston. Here you go, Canada. Those are the only 2 playoff teams. That's it. That's it. The only 2 Canadian playoff teams are Winnipeg and Toronto. And if I had told you 2 years ago, no, hockey in Canada is going to stay where it is. Yeah, there's going to be a big upsurge next year where like almost all of them make it, and then like we're going to fall back down to 2. Yeah, it's going to be Winnipeg and Toronto are the only 2 that make the playoffs. Nobody would have believed that. Nobody. For Winnipeg, they're sitting right now at 104 points. For Toronto, they're sitting at 101. Toronto's in third. Winnipeg's in second. This would be an all-Canadian Stanley Cup final if we see it. It'd be fun to see it. Odds are this will be the last time these 2 teams play each other this year. And they're both trying to get their momentum to carry over into the postseason, so they want to go in on a hot streak. For Winnipeg, I'm going to give them a mulligan on that last loss against Chicago. That was just one of those games that happens. This game in Toronto is going to tell us a lot. It's going to tell us, was that huge winning streak for Toronto, is it sustainable? If you can beat an excellent team like the Jets, who've been pretty decent on the road, maybe it is sustainable. Maybe Toronto won't lose a home game during the playoffs. Maybe that's where we're at. And then all you have to do if you don't lose at home is win 1 on the road. That's it. 1 on the road, hold serve at home, and you win it in 6. That's all it takes. You don't have to worry about Game 7. And for them, they don't really have anything to play for in Toronto. They're entrenched in third. Winnipeg's pretty much entrenched in second. You'll notice I didn't put down how many points there are between them and Minnesota. I did that for Minnesota, but not for them, because it's really not worth putting on the board for Winnipeg. They have nothing to worry about. They are solidly second, and you'd have to be pretty happy as a Toronto or Winnipeg fan right now. Toronto's in third in their division, and Winnipeg's in second. At the start of the year, if I told Winnipeg and Toronto fans this was going to be the case, they would have been overjoyed. Would have done backflips. Well, some would have done backflips. Not all. Buffalo, 24-41-12 overall. They're 3-6-1 in their last 10. They find themselves with Johnson as the confirmed starter. They're in against Nashville, who are 50-16-11. That's right, Nashville's hit 50 wins. They're 6-2-2 in their last 10. They've won their last 2 games. They're first in their division. They're 7 points ahead of Winnipeg. Here we go. Winnipeg loses. Nashville wins. Nashville clinches themselves first place in their division. And then we can start talking about them clinching first in the conference and their pursuit of first overall. Nashville's an interesting case. So Nashville and Winnipeg have been battling it out as to who's probably the best team in the league right now. Nashville gets a little bit of an edge for me right now. Tomorrow night's games are really going to give me an idea of who probably the better team is. And I will give you this. Winnipeg's opponent at Toronto is a little bit more difficult than Nashville at home against Buffalo. Sure. It's really how the teams play. And Buffalo has been playing spoiler to some extent. Again, 3-6-1 in their last 10. They've won 3 out of their last 10. Those 3 are all spoiler wins. That's just kind of the way it works. For Nashville, I should say, I know the record over their last 10 has been a little shakier than during other parts of the season, but it's really hard to maintain that kind of a winning streak. It's really hard to maintain that intensity every single night of the year. So I would look for them to start getting things back on track, and we'll see if Tolvanen plays tomorrow. If Tolvanen plays tomorrow for Nashville, that makes that game very, very watchable, because Casey Middlestad's playing for Buffalo. So we start seeing the future for both teams. The difference being that Nashville's present's pretty good. Buffalo's present isn't quite as good. It's a little bit below, just a little bit below Nashville, just a tad. Minnesota. 43, 24, and 10 in their last, they're 43, 24, and 10 overall. They're 5, 2, and 3 in their last 10. They won their last game. It's a middling record over their last 10. They've had a tough schedule. Dallas, 39, 31, and 8 overall. They're 1, 7, and 2 in their last 10. They've got a bad record in their last 10 because they haven't been very good. They lost their last game. Minnesota's third, as stated. I mentioned here that they're 8 points behind Winnipeg, so Winnipeg with a win meant a Minnesota loss, and Winnipeg's clinched themselves at worst second place. Minnesota can't afford a loss. They're 4 points ahead of both Colorado and St. Louis. So despite the fact that they won their last game and things have to be, feeling a little better, that over their bad stretch of games for who they play. So their tough part of the schedule, they came out of it without a whole lot of bloodshed, but there's still no rest because they have to worry about these Blues. They have to worry about Carolina and Colorado. They're only 4 points ahead in that race. So Minnesota's got to keep their nose to the grindstone. The good news is you've got Dallas, who are 6 points behind the second wild card and just falling as far out of the playoffs as they can get. And they don't have a game in hand on anybody. In fact, they've played one more game than most of the rest of the West. So with a loss tomorrow, Dallas is officially done. That just finishes it. And mercifully just puts them out of their misery and puts them out of my misery and the misery of Dallas Stars fans everywhere. Minnesota's been a success story. It's been a fun story to watch. And there's kind of been no just one player. But if you're going to mention one guy, you can mention Eric Staal and his 40 goals. I don't think anybody's going to argue with me on that one. Staal's 40 goals are an incredible story at this point in his career. When he went to Minnesota a year and a half ago, a lot of people, myself included, said that Minnesota paid too much and that it seemed like a desperate ploy. A year and a half later, that desperate ploy, if that's what it was, turned out to be the right one to make. And he's looked pretty darn good. So, thumbs up to Minnesota on that one. St. Louis. The Blues are 43, 28, and 6. They're 8, 1, and 1 in their last 10. They lost a game tonight in Anaheim, or against Vegas. They're the second wild card. They're 1 point behind Anaheim, who won tonight. They're tied with Colorado, but they have a game in hand on Colorado. So this is that game in hand tomorrow night. They're in against Arizona, who's 27, 40, and 11 overall. Arizona's 5 and 5 in their last 10. They lost their last game, and Arizona's fun to watch. This is going to be the fun to watch game. Game of the night, if we're going to talk about game of the night, tomorrow morning's Boston-Florida game should be up there. And I would think Toronto and Winnipeg's going to be one heck of a battle too. For the most part, though, there's a lot of haves and have-nots playing against each other, which can be problematic. And this is one of those. Arizona is a have-not, but they're not playing like it. Over their last 10, definitely not. Over their last 20, definitely not. Ronta's been fantastic. I would expect him to be in again. I would expect Allen to play for St. Louis. They could go with Hutton. I know Hutton said he was good to go. I haven't seen him since he said he was good to go. I would expect him probably here. And we'll find out whether or not he's good to go. They can't afford to lose points because if they lose a game and the teams that are in their vicinity win, that could be it. So while, yes, St. Louis right now has got themselves back into the playoffs, they're the number 2 wild card right now at this moment, it is still a precarious perch they find themselves in. So they have to win this game in Arizona. Arizona doesn't have to win anything. Arizona right now, all they're doing is winning over the fans they have on the idea that next year is going to be better. Which is, ask Carolina about that. Sit down, have a chat with Carolina or Edmonton as well. How does that work where your team has a good run at the end of the year and you're anxious for next season? How does that end up? Yeah, it can be really, really rough. Very, very rough. I'm not buying it with Vancouver either. I'm just throwing that out there. Next up, Edmonton's in Calgary. Edmonton's 34, 38, and 6 overall. They're 4, 4, and 2 in their last 10. They've lost their last 3. Calgary's 35, 33, and 10 overall. 2 and 8 in their last 10 and lost their last 7. This game screams big night for Connor McDavid. Calgary's in the tank. Edmonton is bruised and battered. Emotionally, mentally, some extent physically. This is the battle of Alberta, boys and girls. back in the 80s, this was it. This was game of the year material every time these teams met each other. And now it's a matchup between two also-rans. It is a strange world we live in, where the Hamonic trade could come back and haunt Calgary the way that the Taylor Hall trade has come back and haunted the Edmonton Oilers. Both Alberta teams, in a bid to try to improve their roster, made daring moves, and they haven't worked out. Mike Smith's been a good addition, good replacement for Elliott, but has he been this huge upgrade in net? My argument would be no. An upgrade, yes, but they needed a bold upgrade in net, and I'm just not seeing it. And there has to be some concern with the way Gillies is played, and I know Gillies is young, but at some point, that concern's going to start to take over, where it's like, oh, what have we got? Riddick has looked good, but is Riddick a future starter? And then, of course, there's Parsons, and Flames fans are going to talk about Parsons. But until a guy plays, at the very least in the American League, I don't want to speculate on how good he may or may not be. It's tough. Because for goalies, that fine line between being good and being crap is really, really, really razor thin. It is really hard to make that determination with a goalie before he makes the NHL. That's why they don't draft goalies in the first round like they used to. There's a lot of danger inherent with that, and a lot of teams that have taken goalies in the first round have come to regret it, and that's part and parcel of what's going on. So Calgary's found themselves kind of in a rough position, and we'll see what they do to fix it going into next year. But for right now, it's a rough spot, and I would think the Oilers come in and McDavid has a big game, and this could just be ugly. This could take that losing streak to 8 for Calgary, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did. And that's regulation losses too. They're 2-8. That's regulation losses. It's not like they're in overtime and they're close. They're really not close right now. And finally, last but not least, San Jose, 44-24-10 overall, 8-1-1 in their last 10. They've lost their last 2. So since the 8-game winning streak, couple of setbacks, nothing major. They're second in the division. They're 7 points behind Vegas. They're 4 points ahead of LA and 5 points ahead of Anaheim. So it's not done yet in the Battle of California. For Vegas, 49-22-7. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10. They won their last game. They're first, as I said, 7 points ahead of San Jose. And if they beat San Jose tomorrow night, they clinch the division. The Vegas Golden Knights have a chance to clinch the division tomorrow night against San Jose. The only team that can catch them is San Jose. So if San Jose wins this in regulation, But again, we're to that stage where it is so close to the end of the year that you just don't have the real estate to make up that room. You run out of real estate. And it's something that happens every year. There's a team somewhere every season that gets close and it just doesn't work. And sometimes they're like Tampa and they turn it around. And sometimes they're like Carolina or the Islanders and it just doesn't work out. So if your team's close and they're on a nice final run, excellent. But the odds that that will carry over to next season, about 50-50 at best. So for San Jose, they don't have to worry about that. Vegas doesn't have to worry about that. San Jose's almost clinched their playoff spot. It won't take very long for them to clinch it now. Anyways, there's your 12 games. I'm going to go ahead and get myself some sleep. But thank you guys for staying up and watching this if you did, or getting up early and watching this if you're in Europe. Thank you so much for being out there and watching. Because for every ad watched, for every minute watched, it helps. It all helps. And if you're just browsing your way through, go ahead and hit like and subscribe to get your hockey fix. Which I have to say, after watching the NHL Network / NBC, ESPN coverage in the States last night, I understand it. I want to say as well that my metrics used to be about 55-60% Canadian and about 30 to 35% American. Right now it's sitting at, I think, 51% American. And about, no, anyways, there's more Americans watching this channel than Canadians, and I had a feeling that would end up happening at some point. So I'm very happy about that. That's kind of a proud thing for me. And thank you to all of the American support I get, the Canadian support I get, and from all around the world. When I look and I see countries like New Zealand and Bulgaria and Belgium and all this on my reports. It's kind of insane. It's kind of intimidating and humbling. So thank you guys for being out there and for watching all this. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you again soon.